am back with Louise Mayberry, who just read a sample of The Song of the Magpie. And that was a really interesting sample. I'm torn between which direction do I want to take these questions to begin with, because in your intro, you say that you're kind of blurring the line between historical fiction and romance.
Mhm.
And in this excerpt, it was really interesting. Something that stood out to me at the very end there was she's so overpowered by his smell, which is a very romance thing. But the smell is that he hasn't washed in a while, which is a
It's not a
very
good thing.
historical
Yeah.
fiction thing. So I guess, like, how do you have a vision or a like compass for yourself for how you balance the historical fiction versus the romance?
That's a great question. I didn't go into this thinking I was going to toe the line between those two genres. It's just kind of what came out of me.
Yeah.
I, I marketed myself as historical romance, and then I had so many readers coming back and telling me like, hey, this is actually a little bit more historical fiction, which is why I now have that in my bio, just so people know what they're getting into. I wouldn't say I consciously do it. I try to be as historically accurate as I can, and I try to make my characters as real as they can be while still falling in love. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I think out of that intention comes this kind of mixture that has a little bit more of a historical fiction feel, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know. Like I said, it just comes naturally to me, so it's hard for me to define exactly how I do it. It's just what I do, and luckily there's some people who like it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this hero you mentioned in the last book was the villain. And so this is presumably his
Right.
redemption
Yes.
story.
He's the villain
Ha-
of the first book.
of the first book,
And this
sorry.
is the fourth book. So we don't hear from him for the two intervening books, and then he comes back. Yeah.
Got it. How was it for you to return to the villain and inhabit him as a hero?
It was really hard. So when I wrote the first book, I knew that I wanted to redeem him. I've known that since the beginning, but I didn't really know how I was going to do it. So it was harder than I anticipated. There were definitely moments when I was like, "Oh my gosh, why did I think this was a good idea?" Because people really did hate him in book one. Like a lot of people, he was a good villain. He was not kind of a light villain. He was sentenced to Australia for very good reasons. And having a redemption story that felt real, I wanted him to feel like he had been punished because he deserved it, but he's also a human being, and he served his time and he deserves happiness. So figuring out how to do that in a way that felt right was very, very difficult. And up until the very end, I was sort of convinced it wasn't possible. Like I was not going to be able to pull it off. But I did
I know that
somehow.
feeling. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question of like, at what point can we forgive, and at what point is there a point where someone's
Yeah.
not redeemable?
Right. And what is redemption? I mean, that's really what I got stuck on at the end is like, what does redemption even mean? How do you redeem yourself? Is it like redemption in your own eyes, or is it your victim forgiving you? I actually wrote the ending like three times. I wrote one
Wow.
ending and then I was like, no, this isn't right. And then I changed it as I sort of really grappled with that idea of like, what is redemption and how do you get to that happily ever after as someone who's done something really terrible? So I,
Yeah.
I won't give the ending away, but it was not easy to come to at all.
Well, I find that when I have to rewrite something so many times, it actually does end up, the final product is that much richer because you
Yes.
have figured out all the angles.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. And another thing that was kind of mentioned here is alcoholism. Tell me about including that in the novel.
Yeah. I mean, he is an alcoholic for sure. And that's even in the first book. That's pretty apparent. I kind of used it more as a literary device almost than anything like that. I don't know if that sounds weird, but it's what he falls back on. It's sort of when he gets to this place of self-hate and he just can't handle the world. It's how he hides from
Mhm.
himself. And that's kind of how I thought of it as I was writing the book and using it just as a way to develop his character and really show how his character is Very, he's very self-loathing.